Hollywood has spent 60 years searching for the perfect silhouette, and it keeps landing on the same 3,000-pound block of Detroit steel. Name one car that has played a horror movie villain, a teenager's dream machine, the emotional core of a cult comedy, a rock star's personal weapon, a secret alien life form, and a parachuting off-road machine in a billion-dollar franchise. The 1967 Chevrolet Camaro, and here is the mechanical detail that stops most people cold. The version that appeared as Bumblebee in Transformers Age of Extinction was not a museum piece. It was a full resto mod hiding a Corvette LS3 V8 and Willwood racing brakes behind factory sheet metal. A wolf in wolf's clothing, pretending to be a sheep. In 2026, every major franchise keeps reaching back to this specific analog machine. That is not nostalgia. That is the market telling you something. Modern cars are too perfect to be interesting. The 1967 Camaro has range. Let's establish one thing before we get into the films. The 1967 Camaro was not supposed to exist. General Motors sat on the sideline and watched Ford sell over 680,000 Mustangs in a single model year, and that number lit a fire under every executive in Detroit. They assigned the project, internally coded XP836, nicknamed Panther, to designer Hank Haga and gave him roughly 24 months to put a competitor on the road. That is an impossibly short window for a ground-up car in the 1960s. What Haga delivered was not a copy of the Mustang. The Mustang was angular and boxy, designed like a pressed steel toy. The Camaro was fluid, curvaceous, and wide-stanced, with what Haga's team called a canvas stretched over wire design philosophy. It had a long hood, a short rear deck, and fender arches that rose and fell like something alive. On the Rally Sport package, the headlights disappeared entirely behind vacuum-operated doors. The whole car looked like it was moving while standing still. Chevrolet built 220,906 of them in the 1967 model year alone, and quietly, without listing it in a single sales brochure, they slipped one additional option into the order sheet at the very end of the production run, a package called the ZEED28, mandatory 4-speed manual, a specially built 302 cubic inch V8 rated at a suspiciously conservative 290 horsepower, actual output closer to 370 when you put it on a dyno, front disc brakes, 15-inch rally wheels, and a total production run of exactly 602 cars. Not 60,200, 602. That number matters every time one of those cars appears on a movie screen. You are watching a unicorn do stunt work. In John Carpenter's Christine, the 1967 Camaro is not the hero. It is proof that heroes can die. A metallic charcoal coupe, driven by bully Buddy Repperton, represents everything human and mortal in the film. Christine, the possessed 1958 Plymouth Fury, represents something older and far less forgiving. The Camaro does not get a character arc. It gets a funeral. The Camaro's destruction was not a quick editorial cut. Carpenter wanted the audience to watch the car die in real time. A period-correct coupe was staged, lit, and rammed by the Plymouth repeatedly until the scene gave him what he needed. No digital extension, no CGI crumple, physical contact, physical consequence. The cost of making that sequence authentic was an actual 1967 Camaro. What makes the sequence land is the contrast in sound design. The Plymouth approaches almost silently. The Camaro sits still, headlights burning in the dark, small block idling low. Then the impact arrives, and that sound, sheet metal folding under mechanical force, is not a sound effect. No Foley artist has ever fully replicated what actual body panels sound like under real-world stress. Here's the detail Carpenter got for free. In several shots, the Camaro sits with one headlight door partially open and the other fully closed. Most viewers read that as a set decorator's choice, a deliberate, menacing look. It was not. That is a documented mechanical reality of the 1967 Rally Sport vacuum-operated headlight system. Worn vacuum lines, cold temperatures, or a marginal pump would cause exactly that uneven, half-lidded expression. The car's 40-year-old plumbing did what it wanted. Carpenter kept the shot. Authenticity arrived on its own schedule. This is the one. If one film defines what a 1967 Camaro means on a movie screen, it is Better Off Dead. Director Savage Steve Holland cast a non-running, rusted-out black RS/SS350 as the emotional center of the story. Lane Meyer does not just fix a car, he rebuilds himself. And the Camaro is the externalized proof that the process worked. No car in the film's supporting cast could have carried that metaphor. A Mustang would have been too expected. A Trans Am would have been too flashy. The Camaro, specifically at the RS/SS trim level with those hidden headlights, reads as potential disguised as decay. The production sourced a car that was, by all accounts, mechanically dead when it arrived on set. The original 350 was pulled and replaced with a 400 cubic inch V8. A rear spoiler was added, 15-inch wheels replaced the factory rims. The RS vacuum headlight mechanism was rebuilt from scratch so it would function reliably on cue during the final reveal. 2 separate cars covered the before and after states of the restoration arc. The transformation sequence, set to Muddy Waters' Manish Boy, is assembled on visual contrast alone. A corroded shell with flat paint and surface rust becomes a mirror-finished black coupe in a series of cuts timed to the rhythm of the track. The car says nothing. It does not need to. That body line, that roof line slope, that front end proportion, it reads as earned confidence even without moving an inch. After production wrapped, the hero car did not go to a studio warehouse or a collector's air-conditioned garage. It passed through the hands of the film's transportation coordinator and essentially vanished into Los Angeles. No museum, no auction record, just gone. Years later, an obsessive fan tracked it down through automotive forums, purchase records, and registered owner data, located it, bought it, and restored it to its exact movie configuration. Haggerty Media, Street Muscle Magazine, and multiple classic car publications have independently called this specific car the coolest Camaro in the world. That is a prop that has earned its own mythology completely separate from the film it came from. Most props end up in a dumpster behind a soundstage. This one has a fan club. In Remember the Titans, the 1967 Camaro carries the weight of a real person's tragedy. Team Captain Jerry Berthier drives a Granada Gold coupe. Base trim, flat hood, no performance badging. That specification choice is deliberate. This is not a showboat car. It is the car of a young man with everything ahead of him, which is exactly why the film is about to take it away. 2 1967 Camaro coupes were sourced for production. One handled approach and character shots. The other was rigged on a controlled collision track for the T-bone impact sequence. The staging had to deliver enough controlled violence to register as devastating on screen while keeping camera operators and the surrounding crew out of the debris field. Granada Gold is a warm, muted color. It sits quietly on film. That is the point. If Berthier drove a candy red SS with racing stripes, the audience would subconsciously expect something bad to happen. Gold reads as normal, as safe, as every day. When that car gets hit, the color makes the violence feel more wrong. Something unremarkable just became irreplaceable. The actual accident that paralyzed the real Jerry Berthier in 1970 was not caused by another car running a red light. It resulted from a mechanical failure unrelated to traffic. The film dramatized it as a collision for narrative clarity. But the choice of a 1967 Camaro, period accurate down to the trim level, gives the scene an authenticity that a production designer had to earn through research. 2 years later, Shane West would buy the 1967 Camaro SS from his own film off Warner Brothers after production on A Walk to Remember wrapped. 2 lead actors, 2 consecutive years, both developing personal attachment to the same model. That is a pattern, not a coincidence. James Hetfield's black 1967 Camaro in the I Disappear music video is not a prop. It is his personal car doing personal speed down the hills of San Francisco in a sequence that is an explicit reference to Bullitt, a film built around a 1968 Ford Mustang. Hetfield's choice of vehicle is a direct counter-argument. 30 years after Steve McQueen, here is a different answer. Director Wayne Isham filmed the sequence with Hetfield behind the wheel. No stunt double. The car was tuned for response, stripped of unnecessary weight, and pointed downhill on streets with significant gradient. The production had a narrow permit window. Several of those runs had one usable take before the city time limit closed. What made the final cut was not a rehearsed performance. It was a professional with a modified muscle car and a deadline. San Francisco's hills compress and release a car's rear suspension in a way that flat-track driving never produces. The 1967 Camaro's leaf spring rear end loads and unloads through that terrain with a specific rhythmic bounce that no modern independent suspension replicates. On camera, the car looks barely contained. That is not a camera trick. That is the correct assessment of the situation. After filming, Hetfield sold the car on eBay in September 2003. Final price? Over $70,000, with all proceeds going to music education programs. Converted to $2,025, that is roughly $120,000 for a private sale on a consumer auction platform before the muscle car market peak of 2021 to 2022. The car's current location has not been publicly documented. That is either a very deliberate privacy decision by the buyer or the beginning of the next obsessive form recovery story. This is where the 1967 Camaro reaches its largest audience in a single film, $1.104 billion in global box office. In Age of Extinction, Bumblebee hides from a government kill squad by disguising himself as a beat-up vintage Camaro. The character logic is exact, and it is a little genius. A worn-out 1967 Camaro sitting in a Texas barn in 2014 is the least interesting thing anyone is going to look at twice. Nobody chases a car that looks like everybody's uncle has one. It is camouflage made of irrelevance. The build team did not use an unmodified original. They constructed a full-performance resto mod around a period-correct body shell. Corvette LS3V8, 6-speed manual. A Ridetech Tiger Cage roll cage finished in yellow. Willwood racing brakes. Custom carbon fiber front splitter and fender flares. Audi flush-mount door handles. Late-model Camaro seats, and a full instrumentation package behind the satin black exterior with high-gloss yellow accent work. This car had to survive repeated action takes while looking like a junkyard survivor. It was running hardware that belonged on a track day build, wearing a costume from 1967. The LS3 engine routed through period-styled exhaust produces a tone that sits in an uncanny valley between a classic small block bark and a modern performance car's more surgical growl. It does not sound quite like the era it is impersonating. That slight wrongness is purposeful. The character is in disguise. Even the engine note is a performance. Michael Bay purchased the car personally after production ended. He did not put it in climate-controlled storage. He drove it. Then in January 2016, he signed the car and consigned it to the Barrett-Jackson Scottsdale auction. Final price? $167,000. For context, a well-documented 1967 Camaro SS 396 in excellent condition sells in the $80,000 to $140,000 range. The film provenance added the price premium. The base signature added the spectacle. That gap between collector market value and film provenance value is the real-world dollar figure for what Hollywood mythology costs on the open market. Keep that number. In Furious 7, the car wearing 1967 Camaro Z28 sheet metal becomes Roman Pierce's parachute vehicle in the Caucasus Mountains airdrop sequence. It is one of the most physically committed set pieces in the entire Fast and Furious franchise, which at this point is competing against its own increasingly impossible internal benchmarks. The Camaro plays a very specific character here, the car that has no business surviving what it is about to experience, but does anyway. Vehicle coordinator Dennis McCarthy's team built 5 dedicated replicas for the sequence. Not 5 restored originals, 5 purpose-built machines on trophy truck 4-wheel drive chassis, wrapped in 1967 Camaro body panels, running off-road suspension and oversized tires. These cars were loaded into a real C-130 military cargo aircraft and dropped at altitude with parachutes deployed. Real aircraft, real altitude, real ground impact on real mountain terrain. The 1967 Camaro body was the costume. What was under it had nothing to do with Norwood, Ohio. Trophy truck suspension travel on rough terrain produces a floating, surreal motion that does not match any expectation a 1967 Camaro body should deliver. The visual contract is broken deliberately. The car looks like it defies physics because mechanically it is something that does. That gap between what the audience expects and what the car actually does is what makes the sequence feel impossible rather than merely expensive. Hot Wheels released a diecast from this sequence in their Fast and Furious premium line titled 1967 Chevy Camaro Off-Road. Think about what that product category represents. A toy company created a brand new subclassification, off-road, for a 1967 Camaro. That is a market responding to a film decision. One of the full-size production replicas was subsequently exported to Australia by a private collector who documented its film provenance through production records. That car did not go into a warehouse, it went into a story. The 1967 Camaro keeps doing that. Here is the number that closes the argument. The Transformers franchise has grossed over $5.3 billion across all films. Furious 7 alone crossed $1.5 billion. Age of Extinction crossed $1.1 billion. The films covered in this video collectively represent well over $3 billion in combined global box office, and the 1967 Camaro was present for a significant share of it. But the box office is not the real point. The real point is range. The 1967 Camaro has played the villain's target in a horror film, the emotional core of an 80s cult comedy, the symbol of lost youth in a period drama, a rock star's personal counter-argument to a Ford, a secret alien life form operating under cover of rust, and a parachuting off-road machine in an action franchise that has collectively earned over $5 billion worldwide. Each time, the car was credible. Each time, it held the weight of the scene without asking the audience to suspend disbelief any further than the script required. The Ford Mustang has Bullet, one chase, one film, one iconic moment, immortalized. The 1967 Camaro has a filmography that spans horror, coming of age, drama, music, science fiction, and action. That is not a single achievement. That is a career. And here is the contrarian reality for 2026. Every year, production designers skip past the current generation and the 6th generation and the 5th, and they go back to 1967. Not because it is the fastest, not because it produces the most horsepower, because it reads. On screen, that body line, those peaked fender arches, that long hood, those vacuum doors on the Rally Sport, communicates without subtitles. You do not need to know what a pony car is to feel what that car is. Modern cars are engineered to a standard. The 1967 Camaro was designed to a feeling. That is a distinction Hollywood discovered 6 decades ago and has never been able to explain away.